Hello, everyone. I am really excited today to have a good friend on this podcast, David Perlick, who is an estate planning attorney with Perlick Legal Counsel. David, welcome today.
Hey, Gabe. Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for being here. David, I know you and I met probably around 8 years ago, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken. And you've been a good friend and a great resource to clients of mine. And I appreciate you and appreciate what you do. So with that being said, I'd love to just jump in today. And why
great.
don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Well, what I'd like to say is, in terms of the joint clients that we've had in the past, there's been a lot of positive benefit that I've gotten from my joint clients with you, adding some stuff about like how we could do reverse mortgages and stuff like that. And it's been super helpful because it's an area that maybe not a lot of people know about. And it's come up in my practice a little bit, maybe more than other estate planners, because I do have a background with real estate. And so one of the big things about my practice is that while it's very focused on estate planning and probate court administration at this point in time, and for maybe the last 15 or so years, before that, it was balanced with a bunch of real estate transactional matters, title review, some quiet title actions, some interesting stuff, and some a fair amount of business. Both of my mentors were real estate and business and tax attorneys back in the day. They're both retired now, but it's something that I now see as the big picture approach to my estate planning practice. So I bring those qualities, that background, to a more concierge level of estate planning, basically. So that's the primary focus is estate planning, but I like to bring in this other these other areas so that people feel like they have the depth of experience that's necessary when dealing with some more complex estates. That being said, about 3 years ago, um, I rolled out my first step, estate planning. So, in addition to the complex stuff that I deal with, I am also focusing now on really helping people who have more basic needs. Now, we might not get into the basic stuff as much today. This is going to be more of an advanced program podcast, but I just wanted to let you know that that's also going on. It's going very well. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I do think that is an important distinction, as I know we've worked with numerous clients over the years, where again, you handle the basic stuff, as we're not really going to talk about today. We've already done a podcast on that in the past, but really the complex pieces, which I do appreciate your level of experience and expertise, especially as you said, when it comes to real estate and business. So one of the unique things that I find with your business that again is different in my opinion than others are your four whys. I took
Right.
one of your workshops in the past that
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, but the four whys was very fascinating to me. So if you don't mind sharing, because I think that's a unique trait or personality to your practice.
Sure. Well, the four whys stem from my work with Napoleon Hill. Now, of course, he was here on the planet a lot longer ago than I was, but his book lives on, Think and Grow Rich. And in that book, there is a whole prescription for how to be successful in life. If you don't know about the book, I know you know about the book. For those of us who don't, it's about interviewing people who have been successful and trying to figure out what was some of the threads that make people successful. And a big underpinning for Napoleon Hill was what he called your biggest why. And in our early work with a company that I've been promoting over the last 7 or 8 years, in fact, it's the company that your father-in-law and I talked about way back. We were thinking, how can we build a platform for people to get more affordable estate planning done in a very efficient way. And as I was working with a very, very profound group of co-founders, we stumbled upon the 4 whys. We were doing a vision planning session, and we talked about how to experience more abundance in life, and how to express and enjoy that in life. And we came up with what we juxtaposed what is your biggest why with what we call the 4 whys. And we found, we think that if you balance these could be like guideposts in your life, drawing you toward a health and wealth type of, place in your life. So the 4 whys, we have legacy, security, generosity, and vitality. And when we look at those, we often look at legacy planning when we talk about estate planning. But I feel like legacy is a bigger concept than just what's your financial net worth, and is it going to go in trust for your children, or is it going to be a charitable donation, or what have you. I think that the problem that people can get into sometimes is they get hyper-focused on one area in life. And the 4 whys was an attempt to blow that open and look at a balanced approach to developing yourself as a person. And so the legacy balanced with the security, I think those two things are typical in the estate planning world, like thinking about your retirement savings and all that stuff. But what about generosity? What about vitality? And what enables you to, maybe it's exercising every day, right? Maybe it's tapping some resources that you might not otherwise tap in order to, be able to get out and do more stuff. And as I'm thinking about that, I think about some of the work you do in reverse mortgages, right? So if we have some older clients that have a ton of equity sitting in their property, and yet they're kind of living month to month, and they don't necessarily need to be, right? I don't know, you know what I mean in terms of tapping some equity.
Sure.
So I really appreciate what you're doing to offer that as an opportunity for people to experience more vitality, especially later in life. And I don't know if it's just later in life, but you can speak to that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that you're absolutely right. It speaks to very much of how I work with clients typically. And that's why I enjoy working with you, because it does intertwine what I like to say, live for today and plan for tomorrow. That's sort of that security and legacy intertwined. But I also love the vitality piece as well. And so, a typical estate planner or estate planning attorney is talking about what happens if I'm incapacitated or what happens if I'm gone, right? But what I'm hearing you say as part of your strategies working with your clients in your workshops is it's not just about for the legacy. It's not just about for your heirs. It's about how to live the best life you can today.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And we won't spend too much more time on this because we got some complex estate planning concepts to get to. But I also want to just highlight the generosity piece. So a lot of us think about what we can leave to, say, a charity down the line. And what I find with some of my clients is, and I find this for myself as well, writing that check today, whether it's for $25 or $2,500, gives a person a sense of belonging to a community. They can see that gift in process, and they can interface with the group that they're giving that money to. So living in today's generosity and balancing it with what you might be able to leave. Of course, you got to make sure that you're not giving away the farm and you can still make it through the end. But
Sure.
But a lot of people can do a little bit more and feel that benefit. And I think that that's a huge piece in legacy planning.
I agree 100%. And I one quick example I can think of a client in California I worked with a couple of years ago, had more money than she needed to support herself and her lifestyle, and she ended up making a very large legacy gift to her alma mater. in Southern California because it brought so much joy to her in life as a musician.
Mhm.
But she was able to do that through tapping equity through a reverse
Right.
mortgage without impacting her other legacy planning goals and needs. So yes, I think that generosity piece again is a great component to the overall planning piece. Uh,
Beautiful.
yeah. So as we transition here, one of the things I also think is very unique with you is how you support your clients through difficult family dynamics in their estate planning. So talk to us about what that means and what that looks like for you and your business.
Well, yeah, I'll love to talk about that. It's one of my favorite things in my practice. There's a part of me that's like the technical geek that loves the estate tax strategies, and I can spend hours in a trust. But then there's the human part.
Hmm.
And it's one of the main reasons I converted my practice more wholly to estate planning was because I got to do face to face and I get to peel back the onion with people. And I find that there are benefits that people get from estate planning when they sit with it. Now, the first step of estate planning is, hey, I've got a 10-year-old. I need a guardian in place. I need to make sure there's a trust for that kid. Let's get it done and let's not spend, half of my, dollars in the bank doing it.
Sure.
But the difficult dynamics, a lot of people have a charge around, what happened in their historic, family of origin. Was there a probate that went awry? Did mom die and the medical directive wasn't implemented well? And was there infighting? And so it's very interesting to step back and listen and
Hmm.
not have a preconceived notion of where this particular client needs to go with their planning, but really pick up on what their situation is and what would be best for them. One of my recent posts on my website at perlicklaw.com is why you don't need an estate plan unless you do. And so yeah, and so there are lots of reasons why people hesitate to get into estate planning because we're talking about death and disability. And so if you're not actively dying or disabled, I will poke fun often at this whole process because I do it every day and I tell my clients, look, forgive me, but I need to joke around a little bit here because A, it's better for me. And B, I think it's better for the client because it lightens things up a bit in order to then allow them to feel more comfortable to start to peel back the onion. And one of the ways that I do that, you got to build rapport with people. You got to have a sense that they trust you. Yeah, this guy knows the basics, but he also is wanting to help me evolve as a human being. And estate planning can actually be a wonderful place to evolve your sense of self because you're looking at like the ancestral history, where it's coming from. Are you receiving something from people? And how is that going to pass on? And is there a burden you're leaving people? And is there a benefit? There's often both. So one of the things that I notice a lot with people is that there's multiple issues that keep people swirling.
Hmm.
And I call it it's kind of like a wheel of decision making. And I call it the spoke and the hub. So if the spoke is that part that comes out of the hub, right, on like a bicycle tire,
Sure.
and you've got many of them. So in dealing with the difficult dynamics, you might be making a decision about business, but how is that going to affect your spouse or your children or your finances? Was there some issue with a father figure in business, and did that go awry?
Hmm.
What happens is we need to enter each one of those linear spokes and hold that space just for that spoke so that the person can feel what that spoke is telling them. That might be the piece about finances. It might be the piece about how's my spouse going to deal with this. But what I find is that because there's multiple spokes in making a complex decision, a person often gets caught back to an old spoke. And they're like, well, I can't really do that because of, and I say, hold on. We already talked about that. We can come back to that. Let's really investigate this particular spoke that we're on right now. Because bringing all those back to the hub is where you can now weigh the different spokes and say, what do I really want to do? And oftentimes they can get to a result that I would never have foreseen. And it can't be about me. It has to be about, what feels right in that process. So the spoke in the hub is really a fun way of helping people through these difficult decisions.
Yeah, I love that. And what I think I'm hearing you say, a couple different things. Number one, as we envision a bicycle wheel, right, with the hub and then the spokes coming out, I'd imagine there's some balancing act that also has to occur with each of those spokes, right? Because if you're out of balance, what happens to that wheel when one spoke is focused on more than another spoke, right?
Right.
So that's a great visual for me to understand that spoke and hub. But what I'm also hearing you say, I believe, is we each have been impacted, for lack of better terms, by our past, right? Our upbringing, our family, our how we were brought into this world and how we've been influenced by others and how that has an impact on our planning going forward. But what I'm hearing you say, if I'm not mistaken, is it doesn't have to be rinse and repeat, if you will, that this is the way it was always done, and therefore this is the way I should do it. You're introducing a concept that says, great, let's acknowledge how you were taught and how you were raised, but let's take a pause for a moment and say, is that what you want?
Right. Exactly. And I have a client I'm thinking of right now who comes from a wealthy Chicago family. When he first came into my office a dozen years ago, he said, here is 4 inches worth of old trusts. Can you please destroy them? Get me out of this trust mess. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about that trust mess. Like, what's going on? Well, it's so complicated, and I feel like I'm kind of in the, balance of, my grandfather wanted and blah, 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 blah. And we pulled all that back and we looked at the generational imprint, which is really what we're talking about. What's the general imprint, generational imprint? And then what you need to do is what is actually right for right now. And maybe getting rid of those trusts is right. But when I got through explaining, oh, that's all tax driven, and I'm going to save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars by leaving these trusts in place. All right, at least I have a better understanding of why I have to deal with this, right?
That's awesome. And we're going to get to the tax here momentarily, because I think that's a really important topic that I want to cover today. But I also just want to double click on one component of that generational imprint, I think you called it. And that is, I spoke with a friend recently that was telling me about some family estate planning that their parents and grandparents had dealt with. And I think what's also fascinating about this is, as people are living longer, and as inflation is going up and everything is costing more, that we have to reevaluate the estate plan from time to time, right? That if you put a generation skipping, trust into place today with the intention that the grandchildren will receive those funds for educational purposes, but there's some limitations there, and all of a sudden the grandparents or the parents live beyond their life expectancy, and all of a sudden those funds aren't available for college, it defeated the whole purpose of the plan, right? Potentially.
That's what's so lovely about estate planning, right? You plan for today, or you live for today and you plan for tomorrow. The idea is you don't necessarily know what tomorrow's going to bring. So that's the plan, right? You're putting it in place and hoping for the best. And to the extent that, you want to look forward, and that's what coming back over time is all about. I generally suggest coming back on a 5-year, plan. I think that there's a statistic out there that people don't come back for 19 and a half years. Now, I wonder why that is. You've got a kid going to college pretty soon, right? So you know what 19 and a half years is all about. But there's this sense that, yes, plans need to be revisited and they need to be updated and revised. And you know what? You might not have the benefit of providing what you thought you were going to provide. But if you're around longer and you're utilizing your money in a wise and vital way, maybe you're hanging out with that grandchild. Maybe you're giving them the living legacy of Gabe Bodner,
Sure.
right? Which is arguably more important than the financial legacy.
100%, 100%. So, again, one of the topics I really want to dive into before we run out of time today, but I really want to dive into, and maybe you can talk about, the nitty gritty with some specific issues that you deal with often in your practice, and talking about estate tax saving strategies, because
Sure.
I think this is a huge component. And you touched on this earlier about that
Yeah.
4-inch thick, bunch of trusts put together. But yeah, talk to me a little bit about some of that estate tax piece.
Yeah, I'd love to. This is the techy and nerdy part of my brain that, made my hair go away. And it's, I'm not saying anything about you.
It's okay.
So I'm working on a trust right now, and we're totally revamping it. There's international assets, there's a lot of money, and there's all sorts of different pockets. And my client is an engineer, and I love my engineer clients, right? Because they just talk about pulling back the onion, right? Like millimeters at a time or nanometer. They're just and they're smart, right? And they want to know how everything goes together. So here we're in a revision of the estate plan right now, because the tax planning piece is becoming more front and center for them, in part because of the looming possible sunset of the estate tax, right? So just quickly, before 1986, I believe it was, when the tax code changed, there was no estate tax. State tax came in '86, I believe, at like $60,000.
Okay.
By the end of the '90s, the estate tax was $675,000. With the Bush administration, in 2000, there was a plan that came into place that greatly stepped up that estate tax over the decade to 2010. And then there was a so from 1 million to 3.5 million. For each spouse, for each person, with the idea that if you had two spouses, you had to use this complex AB trust structure, if you recall, back in the days before portability of the estate tax. And I'm just going to run quickly over this. We can go define these later. But now, once we hit 2010, the estate tax went away for a year. Or two, and then in 2012, it came back at 5 million, and then we had a continuing growth of the estate tax from 2017 until now, and we're at 13 million roughly. And we also have what we call portability, and so portability means that you don't have to have this complex AB trust structure, as long as when the first spouse dies, any remaining exemption can get ported over to the surviving spouse. So, and if that's done, you get the benefit of both spouses' exemptions. However, that exemption, the porting of it, does not contain or does not enable the porting of the GST, or generation transfer skipping. So generation skipping transfer tax means if I'm going to give to a grandchild, right, there can be a double tax on. And so the only way to utilize that generation skipping is either an outright gift to the grandchild, or if you use a trust where the amount is not vesting in that beneficiary's name for estate tax purposes at their death. So there's a lot of moving parts here. Just know that it's worth looking at if you have, grandkids in the mix, because if you give it all, let's say you do have a lot of money, and that amount is sunsetting. I was referring to the sunset in the end of 2025. It's going back down to the 5 million from 2017 index. So the indexing brings us probably to about 6.5 million now, which brings us to the 13 million today. Anyway, so more people are going to get potentially hit with this tax, and it's only a year and a half away. So there's a shrinking window for estate tax planning with regard to this $13 million bucket that we have. And so I'm talking a lot with clients who might have more than 6 or 7 down the line, because can we utilize the additional 6.5 that they have now? And you would do that if you don't need direct access to that money in a couple of ways. You can basically put that money, that say you take 6.5 million, and you put it into a generation skipping trust. You're getting it out of your name, so you can't go back and use it, but you can now have that amount grow. You apply some of your exemption to it, and you don't have to pay Uncle Sam any transfer tax, and it's a gift that you make during your life in this next 18 months in order to utilize what we think might be going away. It's a hedge strategy. There's a lot of complexity to it, and we can add some fun stuff to it in order to shrink the gift. So discounts, you and I have talked a little bit about that in the past. So if you make a gift of $1 million, the gift doesn't necessarily have to be $1 million for estate tax valuation purposes. And that's kind of like, what do you mean? I'm taking $1 million, giving it, how is it? Well, let's say you and I own a piece of real estate together. If it's worth $1 million, if we sell it, we each get 500. Well, what if I want to walk and I want you to now own it with my buddy that you don't know, and my buddy doesn't know you? Would my buddy pay me $500,000 for that? No, he'd be like, I'm gonna have to own it with Gabe. I don't know if I'm going to get my money. I might have a fight with him. I'll give you 300,000. So there's a 40% discount on what the fair market value might be on that gift. So if I make a gift to like a family member, but there are certain strings attached or limitations or other owners, there are discounts for lack of marketability. My buddy won't buy it for 500,000. That's a lack of marketability. So I might have to turn around and sell it for less, or I might not be able to there might not be a market for it. Also, now that I own it with somebody else, I might not be able to sell it. So there's a lack of control. So when you take these lack of marketability and lack of control issues, and you look at other issues around, like, how much money is coming off of this to me? And is there certainty? What about the tax aspects? Am I going to get a payment that covers my taxes? And all these things come up, and especially in like LLC type of environments where you can get an allocation of taxable income, but not a distribution to cover the tax, even more of a discount. So we build these sort of things in sometimes so that there's a bigger discount. So now I, as say the patriarch of the family, can gift something that's worth $1 million if I owned it myself. But once I put it into this structure where there's lots of owners and lack of control, all of a sudden it could be worth 500,000. So now I have only used up 500,000 of my taxable exemption to make this $1 million gift. Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting, and very complex. Obviously, it sounds like, but just kind of summarizing a little bit of what you said, it sounds as though we've got a $13-ish million lifetime gift exemption, right, per person. So $26 million for a married couple today. That's sunsetting in 2025. So if someone has a substantial net worth that wants to give it away, they can potentially utilize today's limits and exemptions, and count that on a form in their taxes as part of their lifetime gift tax,
Right.
going well above and beyond the annual gift that
Right.
people sometimes limit themselves by, but don't really understand that, yes, that's an annual gift, but it really goes toward your lifetime gift.
Correct. That is
Gotcha.
correct. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, one last question before we wrap up, because I think it's one of the things that probably many people forget about. Estate planning and putting trusts together is clearly a complex process, and a lot of documents associated with it. Maybe you can just give us one document, one example for people to think about and focus
Mhm.
on that often gets overlooked in estate planning.
Sure. One of the things that I find not a lot of people talk about in estate planning um, is something called power of appointment.
Mm.
A power of appointment, if I'm a beneficiary or if I'm creating a trust for my child who will be a beneficiary, I can create a power of appointment for that child. So if that child dies, that beneficiary of the trust dies, and there's still money in the trust, like it's a lifetime trust or it was going to terminate at 30, but gosh forbid they die at 27. Um, there would be some default language, like if this power of appointment is not utilized, it might just go down the line to their descendants or what have you. But the power of appointment, and it's different than a power of attorney. So we'll get to that in a minute. But a power of appointment allows the beneficiary of a trust to appoint the property that they didn't use. And oftentimes these are testamentary powers, meaning when the beneficiary dies, if there's a remainder, they can get to say who might benefit from that power. This is excellent for people who, let's say I'm a beneficiary, I had a rich grandfather, I've been getting $40,000, $50,000 a year, and my wife and I, over the last 30 years, have been benefiting from, and maybe that's helping us float our boat. Well, what if I die and my wife is no longer a beneficiary of that trust? There can be a major impact on that surviving spouse if they're not going to be able to utilize the trust, or get distributions from the trust. And the trustee can't just add that person, but the beneficiary, the grandchild in this instance, might have a power in the document that was granted to them that says you have the power to appoint this property to anyone you like. Or maybe it's limited to certain types of people. Maybe it's the spouse, maybe it's your own descendants. Anyway, we can exercise that power either through a separate document or through your will, or an amendment to the beneficiary's will in this case, that says, hey, if I die, I would like to see my spouse, or I'm directing that my spouse gets the income, continues to get that 30 or 40 or $50,000. So that's something that if people come into me, I want to know, are you the beneficiary of a trust? Let's see if that trust offers a power of appointment, and let's see if we can use that appropriately. And one last thing is, let's say you have two kids. One of them is a wealthy, financially astute, and the other is not doing so well. If you die, the rest of your trust might otherwise, by default, just goes 50-50 outright to both of them. Well, that might not be appropriate. You might want to utilize that power of appointment to say, well, 75% should go to the kid that doesn't do well financially, and it shouldn't go outright. It should continue to be managed in a trust.
Gotcha. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's a lot
Thank
to
you.
know.
Lots to know.
Absolutely. And I have a lot more questions for you, but as we're out of time today,
Coffee.
we'll have to get together another time and have you on the show another time.
Would love
But
to.
I know you do workshops as well. What is the best way for folks to either get in touch with you or sign up for one of your workshops?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So perlicklaw.com. My next workshop is June 6th, by the way, if I could give a plug. I'm
Absolutely.
doing it over Zoom, so you can be wherever you want to be. 2 p.m. Colorado time, June 6th. It's a 60-minute workshop. It'll cover basic estate planning. It'll also have about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. And then anybody who comes to the workshop gets a 10% discount on get their plan done. If they move to do that with me. So yeah, that would be a great way. Just go check out my website. There's contact information there. It's perlicklaw.com. Or you can give me, a holler. It's 303-449-6543. Love to talk to you. Tell me that you came through Gabe Bodner's podcast, and you get extra special French fries or whatever.
Love that. David, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Again, we'll look forward to doing it again. But really appreciate you. Really appreciate you sharing all this valuable information today.
Gabe, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity, and also for all of the consistent podcasts and information that you put out that helps the community understand both what you do, what other people do, that helps people live today, plan for tomorrow.
You got it. Well, that's very kind. It's my pleasure. And again, thanks so much. And we'll be connecting again real soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.